Pádraic, I'm sure the panels often start with you to set the scene because you've literally written the book on the scene. Pádraic wrote a book in, I think it was 2017, called Whittled Away, which basically sketched out the current status of biodiversity in an Irish context. So we're talking about landscape restoration at scale. What's at stake? Where are we at? Are things moving in the right direction, still moving in the wrong direction? Just give us a quick summary of biodiversity in Ireland in 2023.
Well, first of all, thanks very much, Ray, and thanks to everyone at Home Tree. I've been a follower of your work, and it's magnificent. It's great to see things happen. So I think for years and years, we have been, somebody asked me earlier how long the Irish Wildlife Trust has been around. We were established in the late 1970s. So like this debate has been going on for decades. The previous speaker listed all of the reports that were written about food health. We'd have a similarly long list of policies, legislation that we passed, reports, action plans, and yet nature in Ireland continues to go down and down and down and down. And we get reports about how bad things are and so on, and it can be, brutalizing to a certain effect. We have seen, I think, in the last 5 years, a certain awakening to those facts and a certain a greater interrogation, I think, with our countryside. I think we've been inured to a certain extent to drive through Ireland and go, God, isn't it all amazing? Look at all those green fields, look at those hills. They're on the front of postcards. It's the Wild Atlantic Way, it's Origin Green. I don't know what it is about us, but we're so environmentally friendly, it hurts. And all of a sudden there has been a kind of a go, well, hang on a second, maybe this isn't what nature is supposed to look like. And we know about it, and I won't go through all the statistics, but we know it's brutal. And I don't know, I think, I thought there was a lot of similarities listening to the previous speaker talking about the techniques that are used to around our food system. And of course, the environment is very much part of our food system. And in Ireland, the predominant use of land and our sea, by the way, is ostensibly to produce food. And it's completely overbearing. The ecosystem of the ocean has collapsed because of the way we have taken so much life out of the sea. The life on our land has also collapsed because of just the constant race to intensify. Our river systems are in dire situation. And we see similar also to the lobbying effort to keep things going is absolutely astonishing. And we're seeing it all the time, particularly this week. You may have heard about the nature restoration law. The incredible effort that has gone into trying to pull the plug on this law completely. Normally, we're used to the efforts to try and weaken it and water it down and make sure, things are gutted. But the full-on attack to try and totally destroy the nature restoration law in the European Parliament, aided and abetted by many people in Ireland, has been absolutely astonishing. In many ways, I think it has backfired. There may be some good out of it in terms of the reaction it has got. From my point of view, we have struggled for a long time to get kind of media attention, to get public attention on this issue. And for the first time in the last couple of weeks, I'm seeing, oh my God, this is happening, that these things are being questioned. So this week will be important. I think I don't want to take up too much time. In a way, we know what the solutions are. The picture of what we need to do, I think, is becoming clearer. It's coming out of the mist with all of the various scientific modeling, particularly around climate. About how the kind of land use changes that we need to use. The problem is we're not even at the stage where we can talk rationally about those kind of solutions. There was a report a couple of months ago commissioned by the Environmental Protection Agency that kind of painted a picture of Ireland. We need about twice the amount of forest that we have at the moment. We need to protect all of our peatlands. We need to reduce the amount of farm animals. We know we need to clean up our waters. All of this was greeted with howls of ethnic cleansing. This is what people were told. This would lead to ethnic cleansing of rural Ireland if we were to do this stuff, which I think is absolutely astonishing because, We know what we need to do. This isn't going to, we need to obviously be mindful of doing it in a way that protects livelihoods and is sensitive to local cultures and all of that kind of stuff, but we're not at the point where we're even having a rational conversation about the things we need to do.
Yeah, thanks, Pádraic. Brian, like it came up earlier that Sinead said she was surprised at the perception that our food system is so bad. And me and you have had conversations about this before. The environmental outcomes aren't good, but actually, you know, other countries' food production systems involve, there is no wildlife on the landscape. And so Ireland isn't working from the worst place, but that's not to say that the issues aren't significant. It has to be a fairly thankless job being the vice president of the IFA when conversations about biodiversity come up. Pádraic said that we know the science, we know what we need to do, and that's clear. We do know what we need to do technically, but I think socially we don't necessarily. We don't know how to bring people along on this journey, and I'm wondering what your thoughts on that generally are. And I'm wondering, you know, someone talked earlier on about carbon farming, and the carbon farming can make you so much. And I said, well, is this system in place? I said, oh, no. So are the incentives there? And give me your general thoughts.
So first of all, yes, my name is Brian Rushe, and I am a dairy farmer. So and listen, first of all, it's great to meet everyone today, and it's great to be involved in the conversation around this. And I suppose, Ray, the point, and listen, I would listen to Pádraic in terms of the things he says and what he says, and you know, we've a lot in common. That's the first thing I'd say, right? Between farmers and those of us that would be in, let's say, maybe the more intensive livestock sector. We've a lot in common. Like if you look at, we are very aware, and I suppose, Pádraic, you talked about the public driving down the countryside and looking at things a bit differently. I find that conversation now with farmers. Whereas I am involved in a discussion group, and that discussion group pre-quota removal and just post-quota removal was very interested in looking at how we, let's say, improve productivity, improve profitability. Those conversations are less important. It's now about reducing our environmental footprint. And I suppose it's important that people, I hope you take that message with you, and that's genuine. It's genuine, okay? Now, the challenge we have, and I suppose the farm leader and deputy president of the IFA is bringing people on a journey, right? And I always describe my job of sometimes as getting people on a bus. We need people on the bus. One of the challenges with farmers in Ireland is we have a lot of farmers. We have a lot of landowners. 130,000 individual farmers make an application for a BIS, or a basic income for sustainability support. So it's your entitlement, your cap. 130,000 farmers. That's a huge amount of people. That's a huge amount of people managing land as well. On top of that challenge then as well, we have the age, there's a challenge with age profile in the sector and a lack of succession. And it's very difficult to have a conversation with a farmer. And I'll use the example of, let's say, the hill farmer. Very difficult to have a conversation with an elderly hill farmer and try to explain to them that the way they farmed has resulted in, you know, fairly significant degradation of the landscape. They've done it their whole life, they've lived it, they've worked it, they've loved it. They will be challenged with that conversation. Another example, you know, how it can be quite difficult, and I suppose closer to home. I live in North Kildare. So people think of Kildare, they think of it high in the rolling plains. I live in North Kildare, just on the edge of where the Bog of Allen starts, so just in that Offaly border. We're a Bord-na-Mona town. A lot of part-time farmers, a lot of people that worked for Bord-na-Mona. Not only did they work for Bord-na-Mona for their whole lives, they cut turf on the bog. Big part of their lives, okay? So huge adjustment in the Midlands with in terms of Bord-na-Mona stopped overnight. Like Bord-na-Mona had committed to slow things down, and people were ready for that, but they actually pulled the plug overnight. You know, and it was the right decision. There was the right decision at the time. They pulled the plug. Massive change, okay? So we're looking now at vast tracts in the Midlands going to be re-wetted. Farmers, these are part-time farmers, small blocks of land. They're worried how that re-wetting might impact their land. They're struggling with the conversation. They want answers. In the same time that IFA are facilitating meetings with Bord-na-Mona, we're bringing people on the journey. The minister comes out and says that anyone caught cutting turf will be charged with a criminal offence under a new law. Literally, it was like everyone getting off a bus. That was really challenging. But we're back again, I suppose. But that thing has died off. But I suppose the point I'd make is that a mistimed communication or a mistimed line that might, and to be honest with you, our side of the debate is as guilty of this as, let's say, the other side, and I hate saying that, But a mistimed communication to appeal to a base had a big impact on a group of people that were on a journey. So I suppose that's part of the challenges we'd have. Like, I'm democratically elected. We have 944 branches across the country, 29 county executives. We have people in Newport in County Mayo and Enniscorthy in County Wexford. We have such a diverse array, and it's a real challenge balancing that. But I suppose that's kind of lays out like some of the difficulties we have bringing people on journey. But I do genuinely believe, and I feel, no matter what level of intensity you're at, or what level you're at in terms of scale or profitability, there is a massive realization that things are going to have to change, and things are changing. Okay, thanks, Ray.
No. A neighbour called up to me the other night, and he's an older fella, but not so old. He's thinking his farming career is coming to an end, and he said, "Ray, I'm thinking about getting into the biodiversity, And he's like, "What? Oh, what's the?" And I wish I had something to say to him. Yeah. I mean, okay, there's the acres or whatever, and there's certain schemes. But there was no obvious, or what you need to do if that's the type of farming you're interested in, is you need to do this. It still doesn't exist, and I still think there's a big lack of incentives. Marina, like, you probably straddle both worlds insofar as you're very much a farm-centric organisation, but you are involved in nature restoration, native woodland creation. What do you see as the big challenges in, like, maybe you could explain the economics of spruce forestry? There's a very valid reason your clients go for it. What are the challenges in moving them to other types of forestry, say native woodland or even natural regeneration, and where do you see? I think you've had one or two interesting examples of successes at scale with native woodland creation.
I suppose I might start by saying that I have always found, like, we work in farmer forestry and we're all about empowering farmers to plant their own land. And I think actually just listening to all the speakers here today, there's a real theme, underlying theme there. I think it's people empowerment. When lands, when forests, when food, when all that's in the control of the people, when the people are doing it, I think it's a much better model. And it's the same in forestry. I see it all the time working with farmers and landowners. They're the ones that are more inclined to diversify and to plant different types of forests in different areas for different reasons, because their main motivation is not profit. Yes, they have to make an income and a living, but it's not their sole motivation in the majority of cases, with a lot of farmers, But farming has, farming is very much business orientated now. It's not, for the older generation, it's a lifestyle, but for the younger generation, it's more economic, in my experience, I think, than it being a lifestyle. Sitka spruce, poor old Sitka, gets a lot of unnecessary flack. I love that tree, and I will defend her to the end. She's an amazing tree. She gives us so much. She's in most of our homes, our farms, our businesses, everywhere. It's an amazing tree, and if people are frustrated with it, it's the humans you're frustrated with, where they put it and how they manage it, and it's not the tree. So she's an amazing tree. So I'll stand up for her all day long.
Could you say a little bit about, we discussed maybe one project where you had, why is it hard to do landscape restoration at scale from a forestry point of view? There's a couple of obvious barriers that jump out to me, say the requirement for an EIA over a certain size, or the size of farms in Ireland.
So it's for anyone who doesn't know, like, planting trees, it's very difficult in Ireland at the moment. To get a license is like a golden Willy Wonka ticket. It's extremely difficult because it's a land use change. They have to look at many different factors. How it does conflict with other conservation objectives, and this is where you have conflicting objectives. I think in the environmental debate and discussion, there's a lot of conflicting objectives, and it's really hard to get that one right, which objective is more important than the other objective. So, one, I suppose, landscape scale type project that we did recently up in Sligo, we're creating a native woodland park. So last year with the HSE, we put in, and this is just an example of what is possible, 105 acres of native woodland with the HSE on their lands, and put in a load of trails and picnic areas, tree trails, habitat signs, cultural signs. As part of that project, there also was 30 acres of old native woodland and part of a lake that they own, as well as they have 30 acres of land and community gardening that they're putting in. Adjacent to that as well, Quilcha had 15 acres of Sitka spruce, which they have harvested, and they're transitioning to native woodland. And then beside that, a 23-acre farm came up for sale that we bought ourselves, the co-op, in order to set up a model forest. So what we're going to do in that situation is set up maybe the 10 or 12 different main forest types that we have in this country, and basically it's going to be a demonstration area for farmers in the main, for landowners to bring them in, show them the different types of forests and the management. There's 5 kilometres of trails in the native woodland park, and then it's going to be connected into our woodland park as well. And right across the road then is the big Marquee estate. So at the moment we're looking at nearly 200 acres of a native woodland and a woodland park, as well as Marquee across the road, which hopefully we can connect into. But just to say, what was very kind of heartening was we had a series of open days there before Christmas in Clunamahan, showing people what was possible. And we had a lot of the local landowners and farmers coming in for a look, what's going on. But they were really interested, and it got them thinking about, maybe attaching onto it, especially there's a stream going through it, in the riparian woodland. And when we talked about the native tree area scheme that's coming in, that they were really starting to consider that and that it would expand. So something has to happen in an area and then expand out from it.
The stories we tell ourselves in the best possible way. Tom, there's been a lot of talk this week about the nature restoration law, and I know you're very frustrated with it, Pádraic, about the opposition, and I think you're right. Seeking to kill it rather than reform it I was not pleasant to see. But I think there was some talk on the environmental side that it'll be grand, this is going to be good, trust us, for want of a better word, and there doesn't seem to be any clarity from a funding point of view still. There has been some wording on it, but there doesn't seem to be any clarity on a funding point of view. And look, we're looking, the message from one of the head European people talking about it was, look, we're just going to have to go to the cap pot for this. And, I know that it's like a red rag to a bull. It's going back to cap for every single thing. And that's not to say some cap money isn't badly spent, but to think outside of cap, is there other potential sources of funding, Tom, or other things happening that we mightn't be aware of in terms of funding nature restoration at scale in an Irish context, be it on farms or on privately owned land?
Sure, thanks, Ray. I have a 7-year-old son and 6-month-old twins, and it's a joke that I always say to my 7-year-old, and I apologise for being English and saying a joke first, but there were 2 snowmen standing in a field, and one said to the other, "Do you smell carrots?" And the reason is because you don't realise, thanks, joke, the 7-year-old also got it, so you're in great company. But I think that whole kind of adage around your face until someone points it out to you. So when it comes to financing,
I'd say it's probably you're too close to this.
sign me up here. Don't bring me back. I'll be singing a song next. So when it comes to financing, the truth is there are many financing opportunities available to people, not just in Ireland, but all around the world. And it's about seeing them and understanding them. I think within an Irish and European context, we too often look towards subsidies as a way to finance the livelihoods that we have. What's really interesting, when we say the word landscape change, the word landscape originated in the early 17th century, and it was a phrase to describe what a landscape or what a place looks like, not necessarily what it feels like. And especially, I'm a geographer, and it's about economics, it's about sociology, and it's about the environment all coming together. And there are many organizations around the world, private and public, that feel that financing landscape-scale restoration is not just a good thing or the right thing, but it makes economic, social, and cultural sense to do so. So outside of Ireland, all around the world, there are independent mechanisms to support smallholder farmers, family farms, large-scale, public or otherwise, to fund this initiative. Now, one big scheme that does exist is around climate financing and carbon financing. You may have heard the word offsetting before. I'm not an advocate of that as a concept, but the mechanism for financing is really important. What it means is there are organizations and people and bodies around the world that want to finance change, but they can't do it themselves because they're not necessarily an agribusiness, they're not in the system, they don't have a big supply chain. But what they really want to do is put their money towards making a change that they care about. And I'll give you one little example of that just to bring it to life. So I sat very recently in Bristol, the Natural History Unit for the BBC, who I work with, and they are increasingly despondent around the role that creating wildlife programming can mean, because they are documenting the decline of the loss of the ecosystems and habitats that we all know and love. And the question they said is, why can't we as an organization play our part in doing that? And the question was raised, well, can we finance something? Can we do something to align to that? And them, as many other organizations, have been raising there we go. Billions of dollars, going up to trillions of dollars into landscape scale restoration. And I, in my own little world, have been responsible for $500 million of funding. And in East Africa, there's a comparison, if we kind of remove our prejudices around that region, there was a program of 120,000 family farmers to access this financing that would not have otherwise been possible. And they did that through choice. If you provide landowners and farmers with the choice of activity that they want to do on their farm, and measure it and report it and validate it and put it in a way that can be packaged up to financiers, you can create real change. And that's what Ireland is lacking. Ireland is lacking a system, an infrastructure that can connect the needs and choices of individual landowners and farmers to create change that can be measured, can be reported, can be verified, can be validated, and can be packaged up in a way that these people that do care are willing and trusting to finance it. It's an opportunity and a challenge.
That's a really interesting point you make about and we'll come back to you later on this, Brian, because that's the missing link. Accessing this money is complex. It's way above the heads of even us as an organization, or skirting around the edges of it, and it's technical and challenging, and you probably have some stuff to say on it, Ciarán. And an individual farmer can't be expected to navigate that complexity, but I really see, Brian, that it's a role of farm leadership organizations to create these structures that allow their members to benefit from this money. And I know there's problems with it, what's the security of it? You go down this road, all of a sudden England seems to be having difficulties in that they've embraced this stream of funding at the expense of a more guaranteed stream of government funding. So it'd be interesting to hear you respond to that, where you see the scope for private funding, or do you see any scope for private funding? Ciarán, you might say different. Are you the only organisation in Ireland? There's a couple of individuals working at multi-hundred acre scale. Are you the only organisation in Ireland, actually, I'm talking about Coillte Nature here, working in terms of thousands of acres of landscape restoration? And could you talk a little bit about what the just immediate challenges of doing it? What are you coming up against day in, day out when you're trying to do this?
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, we probably are, just simply because of the land ownership and the fragmented nature of land ownership in Ireland. So Coillte was created in 1989, and essentially it was all the afforestation that had occurred in the middle of the last century directly by the state was put into one holding. So today forestry in Ireland is one half Coillte, and the other half is about 24,000 individual farmers. So we do have an opportunity to do large-scale projects. So an example of that might be the Dublin Mountains makeover, which is a project to change the nature of 900 hectares of plantation forestry around the city of Dublin. So nobody else really would have the opportunity to access that land at that scale. Not to say we can't in the future, and I think it's great to hear these conversations, because I think there's organisations can come together if they share a collective vision and cooperate on those projects. In terms of the finances, I think the finances are at a really interesting stage, and I'd agree with a lot of what you'd say. A little bit more wary in terms of private finance. I think we have to get the structures around it and be very, very careful, because a lot of the organizations that are very interested in funding it are the very same organizations Nora was speaking about. And, we're talking about, if it's just discretionary ESG, it's simply marketing budget, and it's marketing budget to do something and get a photograph. And that's not really what we need if we want these enduring benefits that go on. You really are trying to attach a value to the public good that is created. And generally speaking, you're trying to attach some sort of asset class to that. And if you're doing that, in my mind at least, the landowner, be it a public landowner like Quilter or a private landowner as a forester, should have a stake in that. So I think it's not beyond us to work these things out. It has been around for a long time. I mean, we've been doing private finance deals since the late 1980s. And their success has been quite mixed. There was a big Guardian research piece done earlier on this year looking at a Vera program on Red Plus, and they reckon 90% of these transactions were unsatisfactory. So I suppose I would say there is hope for it. Ireland is small. We're agile. We've got the right environment for it. With some work, putting structure around it, I think we could develop a system that could bring in private financing. But I wouldn't like it to be at the expense of public. I think there's a role for public as well. And I wouldn't like it to be, I see it as a role in terms of leveraging for public financing rather than replacing it.
Could you, before you have the mic, just technical challenges we spoke recently about. Sorry, maybe. Sure. I spoke to Ciarán recently about a peatland restoration project. I think we might have spoken about land acquisition. Like, where are you actually banging your heads against the wall? But like, God, this is really hard to do in terms of when you're dealing with multiple hundred or even thousands of acres.
The finance is actually not the problem at the moment. I think there's a lot of it around. It's around finding the right kind of finance. The big issue I think is consents for me, and Marina's already spoken about forest consents. That's a real frustration, something that should be fixed. We should be able to unleash that. When you get, as you'd mentioned earlier on, Ray, when you get to large scale projects, immediately you're triggering EIAORs and large environmental assessments. They can be very laborious. There's a lot of kind of ritualized information gathering, in my mind at least, and delaying of decision making. And the scale of the kind of the crisis that we have now at the moment is going to require us to really, really move with a level of ambition that we simply don't have today. So, at this stage of my life, I've lost patience with pilots. We need to be way beyond pilots, and we need to be doing things at scale. And one of our very large projects at the moment is working on a plantation, a lodgepole pine plantation on peat, blanket bog peat in Connemara in Derry Clare. I don't know if anybody know it on Lough Ina and Derry Clare Lough. Absolutely beautiful site. Planted up in the late 1950s and early 1960s by people with a zeal who were actually trying to, with the best will in the world, with the information they had at the time, trying to do good and create rural employment and do good things. But we now know that was wrong-headed in retrospect from a range of reasons, from carbon, from biodiversity, from a silvicultural reason. It was not a good idea. But what I see when you look back at them, the zeal they had and the ambition they had and the scale they worked at, we now need to apply that. We need to go back and apply it at that level and stop talking about small projects. And our regulators need to step up on that area.
I was conscious when we started the dinner about your hunger levels, or when we started to talk. Now I'm really conscious. So we'll wrap up in 5. I'd like to allow Brian maybe a chance to. I'm interested in your view on the private financing, and maybe just a closing remark from the rest of the panel about where they'd like to see us go, or what one big, particularly you, Pádraic, because you're quite tuned into the policy, what you really want to see happen yesterday. What really needs to happen.
So on the private, I have an open mind on the private financing, I suppose, and I'd look at, in terms of restoration and is there a role for private financing in terms of that carbon farming piece if we can get it regulated, get proper measurements on it. Listen, the one thing again, it's like what I said earlier. The one thing I don't want to see, I don't want it to become you know, an ESG requirement, a marketing budget piece. It's a picture, it's gone, everyone's, you know what I mean? And then again, that the social gain or the ecosystem service, then I want to see the farmer rewarded for that. And I suppose the problem with funding, and you know, the nature restoration law was divisive, the language divisive, and I suppose I'd want to say one thing, Pádraic, in terms of some of the language about the use of terms like ethnic cleansing. Not out of my mouth. Never, ever, ever. I'm totally against it. It creates division and it sets us back. And if I'm going to point fingers now, right? We have fellas sitting in the Dáil, again, back to that base piece, and they purport to speak for farmers. And you all know who I'm talking about. And every time they enter a conversation with language and tone like that, farmers lose ground. Farmers lose ground, and farmers know they lose ground. And the vast majority of farmers don't agree with it and don't want them speaking for them. So I just wanted to be clear about that. In terms of then the nature restoration law, the issue we have is funding in terms of that. So we have seen farmers being burnt on designations in terms of SACs and that. Farmers back in the day, they put their hands up, there was a good farm plan put in place, and there was a reward for what they did in terms of, you know, fulfilling the compliance around designations. Over time, that's been eroded. The funding has gone, the farmer's ask has become greater. So as a result, the farmer is worse off than they were. So any funding model in the future, the department have a metric. So when they're paying for a measure on an environmental scheme, it's based on income forgone and your time. So income forgone and your time. So in effect, you're not really paid for delivery. We need to see a recognition on ecosystem services. Let's put a value on that. Because if you put a value on that, that's putting extra value on the work for the farmer. It's giving them a margin for delivery, and it's giving them ownership. They're not just ticking a box. You're telling them you've improved from this level to that level, and we're going to pay you for that. And we need to start recognising for that. Farmers want recognition. They want recognition, and our most vulnerable farmers are the farmers that need the most recognition around this, because they are the ones that will deliver, and that's how we're going to support them. Okay? Thank you.
Closing remarks. Well, they came from a forestry person. That's a hard question, Marina. What do you want to see happen in forestry? Okay, unscramble an egg.
I want more trees. I want to see more trees on farms, definitely, and not just for the, you know, just along the riparian areas. I'd really love to see farmers, you know, embrace forestry as a crop for many different reasons, and the incentives aren't there really to do that, especially not when it comes to dairying. And the dairy farmers, more than anyone, are the ones that need to embrace the trees, more so than the suckler and the sheep guys. But when we come back to private financing, the financing model isn't there to reward the dairy farmer to do it, and that's why they're hesitant to do it. So we need to think about doing that. I would have the same concerns as everybody else. You know, I don't want to see trees or any private financing just as another model to allow big business to do more and make more. And that's the thing that we have to really try and get right. And I think that's going to be really hard. You know, sustainability, I think, is a word that's been hijacked by big business just to allow them to do more. And yeah, there is an opportunity in this country, I think to do something to find a way to reward, because at the moment, the incentives for private forestry for farmers to get involved, the grants and the premiums, let's say for native woodland in particular, which when you're planting native woodland, a lot of people are doing it very much for moral reasons and for biodiversity and because they care and they want to see different types of woodlands, but it's not for commercial gain and profit. So the premiums are great to get them interested and get them involved, but we need further financing mechanism to hold it, you know, to reward them for the biodiversity good that they are providing. Thank you.
I think you touched on a really important point. Like, a lot of our environmental policies are almost based on altruism. You're kind of depending on farmers saying, well, I'm not that badly off, and I'll do it because I suppose it's good for my children. And I don't think that's a good thing to build a policy around. I mean, we all need to look after our own families, and you need to say, we're saying as a society, oh, we value biodiversity, we value carbon. Well, put your money where your mouth is and actually put a good value on it, you know.
If you actually let your land rewild into forest, so if you let it meet the definition of a forest, you're excluded from every forestry scheme, from every payment, and you can never clear it. So you have done this good and you're excluded from everything under Irish law.
So there are mornings I get out of bed and I go, oh my Christ, we're screwed. And there are mornings I get out and I go, actually, I think we can do this. It depends on what side of bed I get out in the morning. But on the mornings that I think, yes, we can actually do it, there are two things that I think really make me feel that. One is that nature has the most incredible power to rebound. We know that if we stop fishing in the sea, the fish will come back in great abundance. We know that trees will plant themselves. Costa Rica went from being one of the most deforested countries, or on a trajectory to being one of the most deforested countries in the world, to being 60% covered in native forest, actual forest. And they did it through, as Brian described, working with the farmers, paying them, not just for producing food, but also for protecting and regenerating the forest. And you can call them ecosystem services. The other thing that really buoys me up on my good days is knowing that Ireland is really an amazing country. We have a fantastic country. We are full of amazing communities. And we have great farmers. And I say that not as just as a sop to the farmers that are here, but when we saw that when there was a scheme opened, the acre scheme opened to all the farmers, huge numbers applied to join it. So I am pretty convinced that farmers want to get on board. The problem we have is we are still debating whether we should do this or not how we should do it and how fast we should do it. And until we get there, we're going to be stuck.
Yeah, I mean, I won't stand between you and your food. A lot of hungry faces out there. Look, I mean, I think we need to grow a forestry culture in Ireland. I had a couple of UCD third-year students with me for the last few weeks, and the year behind them has 3 undergraduates. I mean, it's sad. We need to create a vision of forestry that's exciting for people and that has that appeal. That actually has a really bright future in my mind, but we haven't created that picture. We've been very poor at articulating that. In terms of decision making, absolutely, but let us not have angels on a pinhead. We need, the scale of the challenge is such that we need everything all together at once now. So we need to just step in there and start agonizing, just start doing things and doing them at scale.
And maybe just to summarize in 3 things from my side. So the brother-in-law is taking on board the family farm just outside of Athy, would you believe it? And he just says to me, I want a farm, so whatever you suggest.
Is he interested in renting a bit of ground?
Yeah. And he's like, so whatever you say to me, but I just want a farm. And I think that's probably what the sentiment is there, right? So all of this has to be farmer-centric. And I think what we've seen internationally in the successful projects for landscape financing is it's always farmer-centric. The second thing is convergence. It's top-down and bottom-up. It's about action now whilst trying to change the system. And the third thing is, and this goes definitely to the heart of the food introduction, as a blow-in, there are heavily vested interests in Ireland across all industries and across government. And I think it's going to have to take a real blow-in of fresh air to think differently about how to solve that. And it is through collaboration, but it's also through evolution and revolution. And that's really how these things change. And I think giving the power and choice to farmers is where you start.